Welcome to this webinar, COVID-19, It's Leadership Time, sponsored by Collinson & Co, Forex, Crowdfunding, Foreign Exchange and Wealth Management, and our co-sponsor, Rugby Project. This webinar is brought to you by Johnston & Associates, Chartered Accountants Limited, or Jackal. I'm John Maybury. I'll be your facilitator for the next hour. Shortly we'll introduce to you our panelists and guests. Remember that in our second webinar last week, we addressed what to expect from the government in the budget. And you can go to Jackal's Facebook page for a replay featuring our guest panelist, Westpac senior economist, Michael Gordon. But for the next hour, we're talking leadership from our country's leadership, the Olympics, to your business and to the rugby field, with rugby legend and leadership expert, DJ Forbes. At the end of our discussion, there will be a Q&A. We'll start with the questions posed at registration. If you do have a question in the live webinar, even if it's not specific to leadership, please familiarize yourself with the dashboard panel on the right-hand side of your screen. There's a question area there, and please put your question in there. Those questions will come through to me and we'll fire them off to the panelists in the Q&A. If we missed your question, we will come back to you after the webinar. At the end, we will announce 3 lucky attendees who will win a pair of sports sunglasses each by the Rugby Project, valued at $200 each. So thanks again to our primary sponsor, Collinson & Co, Forex, Crowdfunding, Foreign Exchange and Wealth Management. We salute you. Let's get underway. Our first panelist is Mark Davies. Mark is the leader of Johnston & Associates Specialist Tax Advisory Team. He has 30 years specialist tax experience from multinational, large corporates, family-owned groups and SMEs. He and his team are adept at dealing with a wide range of issues and tax opportunities, ranging from proactive restructuring advice aimed at asset protection, commercial and tax efficiencies, to managing complex IRD audits. Our second panelist, Logan Granger, has worked as a chartered accountant for over 20 years and became a director of Jackal in 2006. Logan and his team work in the area of advisory boards, business strategy and mentoring, due diligence, business sales, acquisitions, and much, much more. Logan likes to use his extensive network of good contacts to help clients resolve problems and make the most of opportunities. Let's dive into the leadership discussion with Mark and Logan, and I'll let you, Logan, fire off and introduce rugby legend DJ Forbes.
Thanks, John. DJ, thanks very much for joining us today, mate. We're really sort of humble and grateful to have your time. The whole idea of this and the COVID environment was to look at some leadership issues from just a different perspective. So we thought, look, with your background, having gone through a number of coaches, gone through some really massive campaigns, coming out, doing a master's in management, and I understand your focus was on the athlete coach relationship, ambitions, relationships in general, and leadership traits. You've gone on, you've done a master's, you've come out of that, and you're now working for the New Zealand Olympic Committee as the athlete engagement manager in an entirely new role, which is something that you're working on, I understand, as you go. And what we sort of thought was, we know that this COVID environment's one that's it's uncertain. People have got, perhaps a lack of certainty. They've got anxiety, so you're leading through those kind of environments. And in the pre-interview stuff, we talked about a number of things. So I just thought, look, we could look at this leadership thing not purely from a business perspective, but how we bring some of those things into the other areas. And we thought, well, your background and your skill set would be really interesting.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I think firstly, thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate the time. And yeah, I guess I'm pretty fortunate that the role I'm in currently is a new role. The NZOC see the value in athlete voice, and obviously being a athlete-centered organization, putting athletes at the top of the spectrum is key in that. And I'm, I guess, working within the team to help facilitate those processes and find ways to, I guess, make it a more genuine, authentic relationship to the athletes. I know we can all say, same in the corporate world, that we want to do what our employers need, and we want to do what our athletes want. But actually, initiating that and putting those things into practice is probably the hardest part, because as an organization, as a business, you still have to find that fine line. So I've really enjoyed again, you know, applying some of the learnings that I'll probably touch on a little bit later from my studies, but also, I guess, over a decade, you know, running around chasing the ball has played has paid some dividends for me in terms of some leadership framework that I've applied throughout my career. So pretty unfortunate, you know, circumstances to be applying my trade, I guess, but in terms of a baptism of fire in terms of, you know, letting or opening the doors into that athlete engagement space, you know, you couldn't ask for a better time. You know, all the athletes are crying out. They want to, you know, talk about what they need. You touched on it. You know, certainty is probably the biggest thing for them right now. 4 years of training, all of a sudden being told it's no longer. We've been given some kind of assurance that, you know, the games will go ahead a year later. But again, based on, you know, how the rest of the world is I guess, evolving and what's happening with this COVID situation, who knows? So, yeah, just trying to find that line between, you know, what we can give our athletes, and it'll be the same in the corporate world, what you can give your employees in terms of some certainty around next steps, planning, you know, setting goals and whatnot. But it's been a real testing time.
I think one of the things I'd like to get to just before we really get into it is you wanted it to be presented, or you wanted to look at it from a perspective of you just not preaching leadership on the basis of some kind of philosophy, more along the lines of your learnings. And one of the things, or two of the things that really resonated with me from you was you've devised your own framework and you've devised what you'd call a checklist. So when we go through these slides or we go through this, we're going to look at it on the basis, or some of the discussions might be abstract, but you've designed a framework which you've called CLEAR, which that applies to you, and and later on we're going to potentially touch on a couple of other areas that relate to PADS, which is one of your other like checklists, right? And so one of those things is, I think that at the end of this, what we're going to try and say to people is, look, you need a framework that means something to you and a checklist that means something to you. So the key takeaways are going to be from this is that it won't necessarily be the same as what DJ's come up with. It's about adapting something so it has meaning to you and a reference point to you as a leader.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think for me, and I'm pretty sure the people that have tuned in, there'll be a lot of leaders in this room. You know, they'll have a lot of their own philosophies, their own models that they pretty much structure everything they do in terms of their day and how they go about their work. And for me, it was important to, I guess, create something that was based around my own values and my integrity and what I believe in, but also more importantly, you know, I was a part of a campaign, or a lot of campaigns, where I could see this athlete coach relationship, and it'll be similar to an employee and an employer relationship, being a little bit stressed, being a little bit tested. And I guess I didn't want that to ever happen again. Unfortunate circumstance for me was, you know, I sort of saw the brunt of that during an Olympic campaign. So first and foremost, you know, that was, I guess, you know, the pinnacle of events for me. And that was probably more of my frustration around why I was so keen about doing my studies and diving a little bit deeper into that athlete coach relationship. And yeah, based on the research that I did, I put it out to close to 150, 200 elite athletes based in high performance sport across 5 different sports to find out what do they see as successful attributes in a coach. And the same way you can look at it as what would, you know, your employees see in a successful boss. And for me, the 3 themes that came out based on the research you can see there in those letters was communication, leadership traits, and the relationships. Those were the 3 themes that across the board were, you know, percentage-wise, data-wise, backed by quotes, comments throughout interviews. You know, it was clear that those 3 fundamentals needed to be in every successful coach, and it's pretty obvious. You'd assume that in any leader of any organization, you'd want comms to be crystal clear. You would want their leadership traits to be consistent, and having that ability to build those relationships. And I guess for a lot of my time, I call myself a young Generation X, where I was quite used to order and structure, and if the coach told me to jump, I would say how high, run, I would say how far. Whereas these days, and I'm pretty sure everyone tuning in would agree that it's a lot different now. So if you say run, it'll be why should I run there, or how do you want me to run there, or and it's quite unique. So that's where I guess that the letter E comes in, engagement. This new generation of athletes and employees are all about how can we engage them better, how can we educate them better, how can we empower them. So E was a crucial word that I thought in terms of engagement, it kind of captures all of that. But this is really around, the E word is really around this new generation of thinking, innovation. All these workers and athletes, they want to find, or they want to see what's the new way of doing things, what's the cutting edge, how do I get ahead of it. And obviously accountability was because there's a lot of athletes in the research that obviously wanted more responsibility, but I guess with that comes the accountability. So I thought that in terms of creating that framework and this tool, it's quite easy to have workers, employees say, I want this role, give me this role, and obviously there's purpose and reason behind why they want that role, but ultimately you go and give them that role, and then are they going to be accountable when times get tough and all of a sudden they find out, oh shucks, maybe I am not equipped for this role, and they're chasing it for the wrong reasons. And I can see that in players, these players that want to be starters, when they're sitting on the bench a bit longer than they would want. But there's reasons for that, and I guess we'll touch on again a bit later on, the lessons and the things you learn in those times of being on the bench or not being in the certain role that you want to be, and how you apply that trade and learning. And that's probably from that generational era where you do your time, you learn and you progress. Whereas now you got athletes and employees wanting to jump in head first at the biggest role because that's where the bucks are and everything else. But again, that when push comes to shove, it's having that accountability that this is what you asked for. Are you really ready for this opportunity that you've asked? And so that's how I've created that clear tool. So it's really just a clear tool between athlete and coach, and likewise between employee and employer. And you're not going to, I guess, nail all five, but if you did, you'd assume that you have a pretty good organization, that people would be following you, be motivated by you, be inspired by you. But at the same time, if you can tick off some of those traits, but ideally, if I could encourage anyone, it would be around those three, the communication, the leadership traits, and the relationship building is definitely paramount.
So DJ, is this something you would roll out through the team, or is this something you sort of kept to yourself more?
So this one was more developed, during obviously the Masters, when I was right at sort of the back end of my career. And I guess I was able to appreciate through my studies to actually see the areas that needed to be worked on or the gaps that needed to be filled. So I think having the ability to apply my studies in real time allowed me to have the self-awareness to see what motivated others, to see what inspired others, but also where my shortcomings were. Still trying to, I guess, mediate between being a little bit of Generation X and now having to, move more to Generation Y, and letting the players lead the team and run the team, and just using the coaches or the management staff to really just facilitate and sort of manage those areas. But that was the beauty of this, that, I was still sort of living and breathing what I was preaching. And now it's even more important stepping into my role. So with more of the mentoring aspect that I'm doing with athletes, but ultimately in terms of end game kind of approach, this tool or this model is something that I will apply in everything I do.
I think we touched earlier on around, and I think it's in terms of this model, and we talked around about like autocratically driven and led by the team, and I was really fascinated about that, because that stuff that really resonated perhaps with Mark and I a lot was, the younger generation, or those guys, they're just not prepared to be dictated to. Like I even know with my son and his rugby training, like when there's older coaches that are less able to have those side-by-side conversations when they're adversarial, it just doesn't work for that generation. Like if you see it for the guys that are what you view as the millennials now, it's an even bigger divide when you get to the kids that are coming through that are 10, 15, 18, that they're even more that way.
Yeah, well, that was probably where I was, able to, I think, fill the gap. There were a lot of these younger athletes. So you could imagine at the end of my career, I was 34, 35, and we had, a couple of school kids playing, 18, 19-year-olds. And so part of my role was really that nurturing aspect. So bringing those players through, I'd have 4 or 5 athletes that I felt needed to be treated the autocratic way and just been given orders, and they would respond to that. But then also having this new crop of athletes where they needed to be nurtured, they needed to be given opportunities to show their wares, to prove to others, and that's how they sort of went about their work. So I think just having that ability to find ways to get the best out of the team was crucial. And I probably mentioned to you before when we spoke about it around sometimes, before you can be a leader, you need to learn to follow. And I was really fortunate that, there was a lot of times when I was just a guy in the team that was just happy to do my job. I wasn't too fussed or phased about, being at the front of the pack or anything like that. But it gave me a better appreciation of actually what, the common folk or the common people, really wanted, or what they were saying, in the trenches, because that's quite a hard task when you're, especially at the elite level with the team. You might be so used to ways and methods that you've done, and you can guarantee that there'll be a couple people, that'll be sort of questioning how you go about your work and the ways you're doing things. So for me, it was, understanding that, things may be going good. We might be getting W's on the board, but ultimately there's always still going to be room for improvement. And so when you have those opportunities to, to ask those questions, the only way you're going to be in that situation is if you built that relationship, with those people, and you could go down and say, hey, we're winning in that, but are you enjoying what you're doing? Because I can guarantee you, even though when things are going well, there's still people that aren't happy with, I guess, the part they're playing or what they're doing exactly as well. So trying to find that line is key.
You touched on something there for a moment, I think, DJ. People say one of the loneliest jobs is being a leader, because you may have pressure from above. You've got people that you're leading. Some of them might not be happy with the approach you're taking, or might think something's not what it should be. Who does a leader then go to? Because you're talking about supporting the team members, whether it's in a commercial context or a sporting context or in a social context or a family context. But who can a leader turn to, or who should a leader be looking to turn to get the support that they probably need?
Yeah, I think having a good support team was key for me. But I think the beauty of our team was in that phase where we realized that one person couldn't do it all. And I think in those sort of positions of authority or power, people assume that all the burden lies on me. Whereas as the new sort of era came through, the team was all about driving the athletes, the players driving the team. So I had guys around me that helped steer that ship in the right direction. And I think a lot of that comes back to you as a leader. Are you willing to share the load? And then at the same time, are you willing to say or admit you don't have all the answers? And I think it's quite easy to sit in those positions and try and make people think that you're there because you know everything, when the reality is in order to evolve, the sport and I'm sure business is exactly the same. It's forever evolving, and you have to be ahead of the game, and the only way you're going to be ahead of the game is getting everyone's input, because there's no stupid ideas in sport or in business. Everyone can put their hand up and suggest what they feel is relevant, because those are the kind of provoking questions that stimulate some real awesome ideas and some real awesome collaboration. So for me, it was just having guys over time that you knew were looking for those leadership roles that you could I guess put them into those situations. So again, our team evolved into a bunch of that top-down coach-centric, where all of a sudden we had 3 to 5 guys on the leadership group that were really driving that team and making the calls. And that, I guess, kind of really shared the workload, shared the burden, shared the stress, but also opened the opportunities for innovation. Like I might have thought I had a good idea about a game plan. Then you had 4 other guys saying, what about this game plan, or picking apart your game plan. And at the end of it, it was again just being man enough to know that, yep, this is all constructive. It's all for the betterment of the team, and it's not a personal thing. So again, that's sort of coming back to the individual about are you have you created a safe environment where if someone does challenge you, that it's a constructive challenge, and that it's that person intending on trying to make the team or the business better. It's not someone having a dig at your ability or your capacity to lead.
It's interesting. You can take that. It's like they talk about it, and it sort of swings back to maybe it's a little bit of a darker part of it. But there's these things where you have a board meeting or an advisory board meeting or whatever it is within the business, and there's 4 or 5 of you in there arguing over a topic or whatever. But the idea is that you do that, and then you come out of there with a united front. You might not all agree, but you've gone through that process, and then you come out as a united front, or you'll follow that philosophy. And I guess that's sort of like your game board meetings, all those kind of things where you work it out, and then you've got your strategy. However you decide to play that game, you've agreed to follow that path 100%, that you're united. Yeah,
and that's what we kind of stumbled across, so to speak, was in our early years where sports psych docs and that wasn't really a big thing, and it wasn't until sort of a couple of years in where it was introduced into the environment, and then so all of a sudden these new ways of challenging each other were presented. And for a long time, it would have been a lot of stuff, and typically, the old behind the back stuff that, that's sort of lingering, but no one's ever confronted. No one ever, nothing gets mentioned, but it's there. So there was our sports psych doc at the time that, introduced, in the belly, not the back. And it was a pretty raw introduction to that kind of method, but he literally, like one of us would literally sit in the seat, and everyone would just, all the teams in front of you, and they'll just write down the stuff that, they like, that they don't like, and you'll just have to sit there and you'll hear that feedback. And then the next person would, sit in the hot seat, and then we'll do that again. And that was really just sort of opening that conversation around, in the belly, not the back, let everyone hear, so you can actually filter, okay, these are some of the things that my peers are thinking. How can I change that, mentality, and what can I do to go about it? But then over time, obviously those methods, rather than the hot seat, changed to a lot more, sort of, I guess, better thinking around how we approach it. So then there was the whole, the concept you hear about courageous conversation. So that's just, having that opportunity to pull someone, out of the pack and say, actually, I don't think you're right in saying that, and being man enough to have that conversation, but also being man enough to accept it. And again, that kind of stems back to, yeah, you can do that, but only if you're creating an environment or a culture where that's safe. So the last thing you want is in your business or in your sport team, telling everyone, yeah, it's all good. Go and tell your mate, if you're a newbie, you can go tell the 10-year senior he's out of line. That's fine. But if you haven't created a culture where that opportunity exists, then you're going to be in for a pretty messy outcome. So again, it's having steps in place and building that culture, building that environment where it's a safe and it's a tested method. But yeah, being able to have those conversations, and then at the end of it, whatever's decided, okay, we're going to execute, game plan B, because the rest, we spoke about it, we deliberated, but this is what we're going to go, and everyone buying into that.
Yeah. If we come on to this next area, you came up with a checklist, which you sort of had it around resilience, right? And you came up with the idea of pads. Do you want to talk about that a little bit briefly?
Yeah. So for me, I'm a big believer in acronyms, purely because of the takeaways you can get. And so the analogy I use when I talk about this is a boxer. We see all the fancy stuff in the ring, but behind, those 12 rounds, there's a lot of hard work that they would have had to go through to get in that ring. So this is based on that, and you can either picture a boxer hitting a big heavy bag or hitting the pads, those focus pads. So that's the acronym PADS. And if you go through that this is if I was talking to a bunch of leaders that I'd assume knew what they were doing, then when I talk about passion, everyone should know what they're passionate about, why you wake up in the morning, and what's going to get you out of bed, what's going to, get you stuck into your day. So, but then if you break it down, P is for purpose. So what actually is your purpose? Whether it's as a leader, or whether it's just in business, or whether it's an athlete, what's your purpose? And probably a lot of people, there's a lot of ways around it, but you're not going to find out, I guess, what you're passionate about unless you practice. There's another P word. So for me, it's about, if you're breaking it down, what's your purpose? And if you don't know what your purpose is, obviously then we need to be out there practicing in whatever realm, or whatever area that you think you're gravitating towards. But at the end of the day, you need to find out what your passion is, what your passion is. And in sport, a lot of what you hear in the All Blacks is what's your why. So same way, if you break it back to the purpose, what's your why? Why are you getting out of bed at 5 in the morning, to get to the office and start your day? So that's really a key. And I know that you guys, as part of your framework around that passion, and that plays a massive part for me. But again, so if you're looking at it like a checklist, every morning that I wake up, I make sure, am I passionate about rugby? So up until a few years ago, my passion changed, but because I had this checklist, I was able to identify that pretty quick, and I could put in the, the plan to attack how I'm going to go about, putting my checklist back in place. A for attitude, so that's pretty straightforward. But I think the key thing to remember in, having the right attitude in how you go about your day is what you do and how you're affected in terms of having a bad attitude doesn't just affect you anymore, it's actually affecting the workers and the athletes around you. So people kind of think, oh, having a bad attitude, and you deal with it yourself and whatnot. But ultimately, having a bad attitude obviously makes you unproductive. It slows down everything that you've been wanting to do, everything you want to achieve in a day. But then again, it's a virus, because you affect other people around you, because everyone can see a bad attitude, without even trying. So, walking into an office with a bad attitude, walking onto the training field with a bad attitude, all of a sudden everyone's talking about the guy with the bad attitude. And so all of a sudden it's taking everyone off their own task as well. So it's having, the right attitude is a given. And then if you break it down at that, I guess, below, because if I was talking to leaders, you expect that all the leaders have the right attitude. They know what they want to do and what they want to achieve. But if you break it down, it's actions. What actions are you doing daily? If you take it back to your passion, what actions are you doing daily to achieve what your passion is, or what your purpose is, or what you're practicing? D for discipline. Again, if we look, talking to leaders, for me, discipline looked like, doing my training when no one was watching. And it's the easiest way to look at it is, if I went to a rugby school, obviously with rugby, and said, okay, boys, we're going to run around the field 100 times. They'll run around the field 100 times if I was standing in the middle of their field. But if I said to them, all right, you boys beat it, go home, go and run 100 times around your block, and we'll check in tomorrow. That's where I guess you find out, you separate, the high achievers from those that are not too fussed, because they probably wouldn't do it because no one's watching. So I think that, the real key about discipline is being able to do the right things, or do the things that you need to do when no one's watching. And if you break that down again, that's about simple, just making the right decisions. If you're talking to a bunch of kids, it's okay, making the right decisions maybe 80% of the time would help you achieve what your passion is. And again, this is how you sort of go back through the steps. But ultimately, from an elite level, it's not having ice cream with my dinner, or eating out of these five-star hotels, traveling the world. You got your coach watching over your shoulder. But discipline, for me would be 35 years old, being told by a coach you can't have hash browns with your baked beans. You can't have bacon with your so those are those little things. But ultimately, if you've got this checklist, then when you break it down and when you go back to what you're passionate about, these decisions should be easy. And that's why I think this was a great way for me to see if I'm staying on track and if I'm still heading in the right direction. And then S is for sacrifice. That's pretty straightforward. If you want, if you've got this passion, you've got purpose, and you've got your why you're doing it every day, then you should be able to make those sacrifices pretty easy. For me, again, a great way to use this checklist is those mornings when you wake up, or those days when you're out and you decide, oh, actually, I might not train today. I might give training a rest today. Or you decide to go out with the boys, have a bender when you've got something else on. Those are the kind of things where, because of the checklist, you can actually go back and go, oh, actually, flip, maybe I'm not as passionate as I was about this goal that I'm chasing. And for me, again, like I said, 2 years ago, or almost 3 years ago, I woke up and I was just like, far out, I think I'm done in terms of rugby. I'm not as passionate to go through the injuries, to sacrifice the type of food, to sacrifice the time with my family, to all those kind of things. But because I had this checklist, it was quite easy to check those things off, and I just made that decision. Whereas you can find yourself a lot of the time, sitting, in a room, just trying to decide, what should I do? I don't know. I'm not too sure. And you've got all these questions to ask, which makes the whole process a lot more draining, a lot more time consuming, energy consuming. Whereas if you've got this list, and again, like if you look at like a boxer, you've got the focus pads. Are you hitting the pads? And as soon as you're missing one of those pads, then you can easily start reassessing it and start planning your goals again. Hopefully that makes a bit of sense. I mean, S, if you wanted to talk in the business context, is that being selfless. One of the leadership qualities that I would like people to think I have is that servant leadership, but being selfless. So I was in the team, I think, for a very long time because I was the guy that was willing to put my head in dark places, because I wasn't too worried about the accolades. I didn't need the pats on the back. I knew that if the team was winning, that I would be in a good place in terms of I'd be happy with how things are going as a captain, as a player. We'd achieve because the overall goal was to succeed, and so I was willing to do, I guess, the things that people didn't want to do, or the not cool stuff, but in business is exactly the same. There's going to be people that don't want to do those kind of roles, don't want to do those kind of jobs, but in order to put the puzzle together, everyone has to play a part. And if you're that type of leader that's willing to fill that gap, then again, it does provide an opportunity, for longevity, because you're willing to, to be the fixer or the handyman on the spot that's going to be able to fill those voids. And I guess, ideally, if you have people that you can delegate on those roles, even better, if you know that that's going to get the best out of them. But yeah, for me, a massive thing was definitely being in that space, for a very long time, but because I wanted to do, the best I could for the team.
Yeah, I think because you talked about one of those things that you sort of said was, well, some of the best leaders are the ones that can delegate to those they can trust to execute and deliver.
Yeah. Well, that was key for me, because I know in my early days, I kind of felt, the burden of making the big calls, because half of me was like, are the boys experienced enough to make the call? But then the other half was more worried about the repercussions of them making a call and not succeeding. And I didn't want them to feel that pressure and that burden. I was happy to take that, given that it was my official title as the captain, that I should be the one to take the blame. And you see a lot of that in sports where the captain or the person always tries to shoulder the brunt of what people are sort of saying or feeling. So that was definitely one thing that I developed over time, but it definitely, it gave that opportunity for others to stand up. And again, based on using the team around me to drive the others, it was quite easy for me to identify, this bunch of boys would be more suited to hearing from this player, or for certain drills, these boys are going to be more, I guess, inspired or motivated by hearing this guy talk about it, or seeing him do the drill. So finding those sort of ways, and again, opportunities where different leaders will obviously relate better, but still gets the ultimate outcome, rather than one trying to facilitate it. And I guess there's that old saying that leaders don't create followers, leaders create more leaders. So that's kind of the mindset where when you're leading, you're not sort of leading to put everyone in their place. You're actually leading and providing everyone with opportunity or tools to actually become leaders in their own right. And then when it does come time to delegate, all of a sudden you've got this luxury of this massive pool of leaders in your business now, based on what you've just gone and created over time, rather than if you were always in that autocratic position and you haven't given people the opportunity to grow, opportunity to share. Then all of a sudden, when it is time, when you do need to delegate and when you do need to share that load, you haven't given everyone the opportunity. All of a sudden you're wondering, oh, how come I don't have these workers that they'll be working for me for 10 years, but they're not in that leadership position or role. So yeah, just trying to remember that you're not trying to create followers, you're actually trying to create more leaders.
You sometimes see situations, I think, DJ, certainly in a work environment, perhaps not so much in sport, but where there's a desire to treat everyone the same and not to recognise the differences between members of a team. So yeah, my attitude certainly in a work context is I try and think of sport and say, well, everyone in a team doesn't have the same role. Everyone's got different strengths, different weaknesses, and you're trying always to play for the strengths and not focus on the weaknesses. And if you can sort of combine the strengths of the various team members in the right way, you're probably going to get some pretty good outcomes. And I see, I think listening to you then, I sort of picked up hints of that around sort of trying to use different people in different situations because of their particular strength in that area, whether it's a way of communicating with another player or a way of demonstrating something to another group of players. That seems to me to be along the lines of what you're talking about.
Yeah, for sure. And I've obviously become more aware of that now in the business world when we have our sort of our working group days and our team building days, where we've spoken about those profiling or profile assessments, and seeing how everyone is different, and I guess appreciating that different people's profiles work better with other profiles, and then also based on the position or the role you're in, based on your personality and the things that I guess motivate you and inspire you, actually put you in a better seat to drive those certain roles. And so you wouldn't put someone who loves facts and whatnot into a real relationship role, because they just want to know, these are the numbers, this is what the facts say, this is the data, this is what we do. Whereas if it's a role where you're trying to inspire and create a real unity and some team culture, you're not going to want your stats man jumping in there trying to deliver a speech. You're going to want someone who's relatable, who's real people person and whatnot. And so I've come to appreciate that and see how different and how people work in my office. We've got sort of all these different personalities. In the sports context, you're right, it's a bit different because there's that kind of end goal, and a lot of stuff gets ironed out pretty quick. And that was one of the first things I said, like in a working environment, you can kind of see how they have these sort of little pockets of differences and everything else. But in the sporting world and most teams that I've been in, you can have that sort of chat at the beginning. You have a few sort of little subgroups and all that, but it does get ironed out pretty quick. And everyone's sort of chasing, getting W's on the board. But whereas, in the organizations where there's a lot more numbers to deal with, a lot of different roles, not just, chasing a ball. There's a lot of different roles, different aspects that you play. So definitely around that self-awareness, profiling assessments and knowing how to get the best out of each other. Also, how to stimulate those relationships, about putting the right people together. So you're spot on.
Yeah, I'm leaving some space for you, Mark. I'm just letting you go, mate.
No. I'm dying to ask, did you enjoy eating bacon again?
Yeah, well, that's that's quite hard case, because in the years when I, obviously I've got 2 young kids. So when I used to come home from tours and all that, and would go, as you do, is you've been traveling, you'll take them out and takeaways and let them eat whatever they wanted to eat. A lot of the time, I'll sort of have to waste food. It was a bugbear of mine, but I couldn't eat it because obviously it wasn't part of my nutritional plan. Whereas now there's nothing that goes in the rubbish. There's donuts and ice cream and everything else that gets left behind from the kids. Dad cleans that up, so I get my fair share of bad food at the moment, but still training enough to burn enough and make enough room for those calories.
It's classic, eh? It just that whole thing just is like I had a dietitian for a while. I still got one, and like she's like, why don't you just eat normally and you wouldn't have to train so hard? You have to train hard just to burn off all the crap you eat.
I'm a big believer in the old simple formula: calories in, calories out. So it's like I eat what I want, but I just make sure I'm sweating up a storm most days.
Yeah, it's fascinating. If I think in closing up part of this area before we go to some of that Q&A stuff, I just think you were talking about one of those things, and it sort of came through in a few of the themes. It's like understanding when it's not ringing true. What have you so just on that was probably one of my last touch points, is that must be sort of an instinctive thing.
Yeah, well, I think for me it was kind of over time you sort of develop those I guess that tool of that sort of self-awareness. And I think for me a massive thing and probably even more so in organizations is when you're trying to stay true and being authentic. What I found, it can be really testing, because you're in a business or organization where they have their values and standards and criteria and deadlines and things that you have to meet along the way, and then also you go in with your own set of values and everything else along with the rest of the organization. So you've got this real, I guess, awesome melting pot of differences and whatnot. So I guess in those trying times, it's how true to your own values can you stay, but also sort of being socially aware, socially accepting of actually the organizational values as well, and at the end of the day, it's being able to not compromise your integrity and what you believe in and everything else, but at the same time, there's no yet to see, but there's no sort of line that meets bang in the middle. There's always going to be that time when you're going to be tested, and I guess it's just how you go about that and find your ways to mitigate when you need to, in order to stay true to what you believe in, but also still get what you need out of the organization as well, and fulfilling your own role. So it's a real tough one, but I think it's part of the type of leadership people have, and if you have that real authentic, and then it allows you to stay true and hold true to your values and your integrity and what you want to go and how you want to go about your work, but also it should allow you to also be able to to be able to identify when you actually have to be mindful of, or at least socially accepting of these other new norms.
Yeah.
Okay, we should probably get to calls to action.
Calls to actions. Yep. So Mark, I'll let you lead off with that one.
Yeah, I think one of the key things to take away from today is DJ's built a framework that works for him. It's relevant to what he wants to do and how he wants to achieve things. But if we can go away and sort of build our own frameworks of what's important and what's relevant for us, why are we getting up in the morning? What is it we want to achieve? What are the things that are important for us to live by? Then I think, similar to how they say people that write down their goals have a massively increased chance of actually achieving those goals over those that don't write them down. Go and build a little framework for yourselves and get those most important aspects down, and particularly when things get tough, come back and re-look at it. Or maybe you want to look at it every morning like DJ did, but when things get tough, I think it's really useful to have a bit of a, call it a framework, call it whatever you like, but something to come back and refer to and just check in on and help you get back on track, or help you see what's important. Second thing would be make a checklist that works for you. So the framework's sort of a higher level piece. The checklist might be a bit more detailed around particular actions that you think you should be doing or things that you shouldn't be doing, and check yourself against them. And one way of staying accountable is involve others in that as well. So it's easy to cut corners if you're not sort of sharing this stuff with anyone else. But if you've got someone, a mentor or a peer, or just somebody trusted that can help you with this, then it can certainly help you stay on track. And as I say, these things are really easy when things are going well, but it's when things aren't going quite so well, or there's a bit of uncertainty like there is at the moment, or things aren't quite going to plan. That's when these things can get really useful and help us to not cut corners and to focus on what's really important for whatever success is in our lives, and getting us one step closer to that success, whatever it happens to be.
Yeah. Oh, look, the last thing I'd say is I really like the idea that what's come out of talking to DJ and all of us behind the scenes was these acronym-driven frameworks and checklists. I really like that. If it was my takeaway, it'd be, can you figure out for yourself, rather than saying, look, what we're trying to tell you is leadership or whatever is, look, can you devise an acronym-driven framework and an acronym-driven checklist that goes with it, that resonates with you? That's what I think the call to action here is, those two things.
Excellent. Shall I jump in with some questions, gentlemen? And Mark, I just want to say you could be a motivating speech there. That was very well done. A motivating speech for a New Zealand Sevens team, perhaps. There was one question, Vicky, you asked a very pertinent question, and hopefully we've answered that question through PADS. I think that has answered your prioritizing question. So know your purpose first, and then everything will lead from there. Sam asks, DJ, did you wait for your team members to put their hands up for responsibilities, or did you assign them roles?
Yeah, I think we saw opportunities to provide those leadership opportunities. So over time, there were certain roles that I would facilitate with a couple of my generals, so to speak, and we knew that in order to get it done more efficiently and in a timely manner, we needed to delegate that. And so it was all about identifying the roles where we could share that responsibility, and then where we knew that, okay, athlete X, Y, and Z were the next tier of leadership in our own opinion, then we'll put them into that position and to give them that opportunity. And then through that, we'll be able to see whether they enjoyed it or whether we enjoyed them leading it. And then over time, as they continued, then we will start to develop, their leadership roles. And then the ideal scenario would be those athletes or employees or leaders would then come to us asking for more responsibility. And that would sort of show the growth in them as individuals, as well as their belief in themselves. Rather than, it can be quite daunting if you say, hey, John, you're gonna be leading the forwards today, and some may enjoy that baptism of fire, but some might be like, oh man, like, nah, they're not, so it's just trying to find those nice ways to almost, spoon feed where we need to, but it provides that opportunity. And then again, like you said, if they respond well to it, we can either tick the box from a leadership development point of view, or they could actually reach out and say, hey, I want more, which would be the ideal scenario, because then you got these athletes or employees that are willing to grow their capacity.
Got it. Dylan asks, and you probably might have already covered this, but was leadership natural to you? And if it wasn't, did you kind of grow into it? Obviously, we can see that you grew into it, but when you first got into the team, or you first had an opportunity, were you a natural leader?
No, I wouldn't say I was a natural leader. I think for me, coming from from a Christian background, raised in a half Kiwi, half PI background, a lot of it's about respect and more culturally quite reserved. So I wouldn't have pictured me being a leader by any means, but I do remember the time when I got the phone call from Gordon Titchens to come speak to him in his room. So obviously jumped in his room, one of my first tournaments at the Wellington Sevens, and he sat me down and said, "Hey mate, I'm looking at making you captain of my team for the year." And I know that's kind of all I heard in the conversation was that. Whatever happened after that, I can't really remember, but my mind was just ticking over, going, "Man, am I ready to lead? And do I have the ability to be good enough to be labeled the captain?" And all these thoughts were going through my head. And I think it was just for me an opportunity to really embrace someone else believing in me. So someone else putting their trust in me, and I had to really look at it like that, saying, well, if this guy who's a legend thinks that I can lead his team, well then, he must believe in me, or he must have seen something in me. So I think it was just, looking at it a different way, rather than, some players might think, yeah, I'm the man, I should lead this team, I'm gonna smash this. For me, it was more about, okay, this guy believes in me. He's seen something in me that resonates with him and some of the leaders that have gone before. So I'm gonna take it by the horns and give it a crack. And then over time, I developed my own sort of type of leadership, developed my own framework, as you guys have seen. And I guess it's still evolving as we speak. Different realms, you have to be a different type of leader, but definitely just being aware that I think over time of growing into it.
Got it. Avikash asks, can you describe your state of mind under pressure? Perhaps an experience on the field that was your greatest moment of pressure. Can you remember a particular game, a particular tournament? I'm sure there are probably plenty there where your state of mind under pressure was peaked.
Yeah, there's been a lot of those. I mean, sevens is a crazy sport. Rugby's rugby at the end of the day, but sevens, a bounce of the ball, a ref's call literally can win you or lose you the game. So there's 1,000 times where I've been stressed during a sevens match. I think one of the big ones for me was the World Cup in Russia against USA, quarterfinal. Win or lose, you're out. And we were down, I think 17 or 19-0 with I don't know how many more minutes to go in the second half. Long story short, we won that quarterfinal, ended up going on and winning the World Cup in Russia. But for me, I think the biggest thing was in those times of stress and anxiety was trying just to go back to the processes. I knew we had the guys on the field that would blow any team off the park. But we just, one, obviously needed possession, we needed the ball, and two, we just needed to build some momentum. So for me, it was just trying to say, hey, we just need to get our hands on the ball, and we need to go back to our processes and put some phases together. We, like any game, playing catch up, the first thing you want to do is touch the ball and try and score straight away. But for me and the team, the boys, we sort of spoke about, and actually we just need to get our hands on the ball first. So first things first, and then just build some momentum, and then momentum will build pressure, and then pressure will crack the defense, and we'll start scoring points. And it'll be exactly the same like in business. You need to have first things first. You set your plan or whatever you need to do, and then find ways to put those plans into process and start chipping away and start building momentum, and then starting to, I guess, get the fruits of that at the end of it all. So that was for me. It was just trying to go back to the processes and believing in the team. The boys that we had. There was no sort of doubt around all that kind of stuff, but it was just we needed to first things first, just focus on one thing at a time.
DJ, when you go through the back of that, I just want it's a personal question for me, right? So you've done that and you won, right? Is the feeling different at the back end? When you've been that far down and you've been that stressed and you've been in the hole, but you dug yourself out. When you walk off the field, how do you feel different than you do at other times?
Well, again, this is because it's unique to sevens. To be fair, I was just relieved because we had another opportunity to win the World Cup. But that's the hardest thing about sevens. Like in 15s, that game would be the game and you're done. But for us, it was we had to go through all of that, win that, and then it was about, okay, how do I bring, the team, how do we come back down and reassess and try and get everyone back up again, putting aside all the bad parts of that game and building on the good stuff to try and do it 2 more times to even have a chance at, at winning the final. So that was probably the hardest thing. Was the beauty was for the team, all of a sudden, this new sense of belief, like far out, man, we were 19 points down, and we came back in a quarterfinal to do it. So all of a sudden you can see the belief was up here, but now there was still the element of, if we face that situation again, what are we going to do? Or how do we put ourselves in a position that never happens again? And then, finding ways for me to keep the boys, back on task. Like we got out of jail with that one, but we still got to we still got to win 2 more finals, to win the medal.
So we've got probably room for 2 more questions. Rick asks a yes/no question as it relates to COVID and the country's leadership. Do you think Jacinda has done a good job at leading the country?
Yes.
Yes, no. You can add a comment if you want to.
I'll just say yes and no comment.
Nice one. The best book that you would recommend, another Rick asked this question, best book on leadership that you would recommend?
I think there's a lot of people that resonate with a simple book called Legacy by James Kerr. I think a lot of people probably have already read that. I've got a lot of leadership books. Alex Ferguson was a good leadership book. But yeah, I think that Legacy book, I guess just because I'm reading it and kind of living it and breathing it, even though it was the All Blacks 15s talking about it, it just really resonated. And the stuff that they were doing, I could easily identify with. But how they translated that to the business world was really cool to see.
Last question for you, and we'll make it a fun one. When will, who asked this question? It's Steve. Very good question, Steve. When will the Warriors win a premiership? And maybe you want to add, you've got maybe a minute and a half to go on this. What do you think is what's the missing link? Do you want to you want to go at this one?
That's a tough one, eh? I'd love for them to win. If there's ever going to be a year where they should or they could, I would love for it to be this year. Based on, they've got an opportunity now where they've made some massive sacrifices. If anything, I'm hoping that by being over there, for making this sacrifice, having the team isolated in Aussie, that's surely got to bring them together as a unit. So I'm thinking off the back of some pretty big calls. I don't want this to be an excuse, because they should be thriving on the fact that, hey man, we all said yes to this, and that should, if anything, bring the team together 10 times better than what people may have think it's been, and hopefully get some reward for some massive sacrifices to saying yes to going over there.
Very good, DJ. Thank you so much. We are coming to a close. I did miss the question from Laurie, and I think that was the only one I missed there. We need to announce our 3 Rudy Project Sports sunglasses. 3 winners, valued at $200 each. Pretty nice price. Thank you to the Rudy Project. Peter Nicol, Simon Parkinson, and A. Wilson. You are the 3 lucky winners. We will be notifying you to work out how we're going to get those sunglasses to you, but I reckon you could probably come see us pretty quickly. At the conclusion of this webinar, you will be sent an email with the actual recording, so feel free to share this with your staff, with your team, so we can have better leadership in business, better leadership at your place. There'll also be an email, a short survey with some questions about how we went and how we can better serve you in future webinars. We'd like to thank you. Thank you so much for attending this session today. We hope you got some value today. On behalf of DJ Forbes, Logan Granger, Mark Davies, and the entire Jackal team around the country, north and south, I'm John Maybury. We'll see you in the next webinar.